In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the passenger side axle on this Mazda 6. Let's get started. Use a 21mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts, and then take the wheel off. Let's remove the axle nut just to give ourselves a little bit more space as we pull the knuckle forward. We don't want to separate the inner CV joint. Use a 32mm socket, remove this. Make sure it pushes through, just like this. If it doesn't, take a punch and a hammer, tap it through. You don't want it to be seized in there so that when we pull the knuckle, it can actually slide through. I'm going to remove this retainer for the ABS wire off of the strut so I can have more slack in it. I don't want to break the wire. Take a pick, squeeze in on these little tabs, push it through. Next, before we remove these bolts, I'm going to pull off the clip for the brake line just so that I can have a little bit more slack when this comes forward. I'm going to take a pair of pliers, wiggle this side to side. There we go, remove that, and this should slide right out of the strut bracket. Leave that over there. Now use a 24mm socket on the nut side and a 21 wrench on the bolt side to hold it. Loosen up the 2 strut bolts. Okay, that pushes through, that's perfect. Sometimes these get seized inside the knuckle. Do the same to the lower one. Okay, at this point you want to tap these through. When you take the lower one out, keep in mind the knuckle is going to want to drop down and come forward. So make sure your axle is pushed in, make sure everything else is ready to go. Support it the best you can, and just watch what it's doing so that it doesn't break anything or pull on anything that it's not supposed to. Go slow, separate this, pay attention to all of this, get that axle aside. What I'm going to do now is get a bungee cord and just tie this knuckle up here with the axle on the side. That way it can't come forward too much. I'm going to access the axle through the oil change access hole here. So to remove this panel, you need a trim tool, pop out this push clip. That'll remove the back half of it, and then 2 8mm bolts or screws on the front of it. That should get the rest of it out for you. Hold on to it. Take these out. We have a carrier bearing here and a cap that has 2 12mm mounting nuts. We have to remove both of these. So grab a socket and a ratchet, break them both free. Okay, so this thing pulled out the whole stud. That's all right. Now remove the cap. Now you're going to want to grab onto the axle, pull it away from that carrier bearing housing, slide it straight out of the transmission. Be careful not to hit anything that's delicate in there. And there it is. Use a rag and clean up the area where the bearing mounts. If yours has corrosion on it, sand it down. Mine's pretty good, it just had some debris. So once you wipe that off, take the axle and slide it through. Careful of your boots, careful of any wires that are in the way. And of course, as you put it into the transmission, pay attention to the input or the output seal. All right, that's fully seated. Let's get the bracket back in, or the cap for the carrier bearing. Unfortunately, mine at the top came off with the stud, so I'm going to thread this back on. Once that's mostly on, I'm going to thread on the bottom. Grab your 12mm socket, ratchet, snug them up. I can't torque these, so I'm going to make them nice and tight. The reason I can't torque them is just because they're at a strange angle here. I cannot fit my torque wrench in. 18 foot-pounds is the torque for these, so they don't have to be extremely tight. Just snug them up about 1/8 of a turn after they bottom out by hand. Make sure they're both even. Yep, perfect. Reinstall this shield. Put a thin layer of anti-seize on the splines of the axle. That way it doesn't get stuck in the hub in the future. You don't need a lot. It'll just get wiped off if you put too much on. Grab the axle, slide it into the knuckle carefully. Make sure it goes through. Now have your bolts ready so that we can lift the knuckle into position onto the strut. Once the first bolt lines up, put it through. Now you can let go. Put in the second one. Remember, they go front to back. Wiggle this around if needed to line it up. There we go. If you have to, tap it in all the way. Put the mounting nuts on. Snug these up. $180 foot-pounds is the torque for these bolts. As you can see, my bolt is spinning even though the torque wrench beeped. I am going to try this again, but hold the bolt. There we go. I want to make sure that it's actually accurate. Do the same on the bottom. All right, that's tight. Resecure the ABS wire by putting in this clip, make sure it clicks. Go down to the brake hose and slide that through its bracket. Once it's through, put this retainer clip back in. You'll have to tap this in. Make sure it's nice and flush all the way. There we go, just like that. This should not move, should not come out. Install the axle nut. I'll bottom it out, and the torque for this is 200 foot-pounds. Use a pry bar between the lug studs to prevent this from spinning, and torque this, like I said, 200 foot-pounds. That's it right there. Reinstall the wheel. Put on all 5 of your lug nuts, bottom them out in a cross pattern, and then also in a cross pattern, tighten them to 80 foot-pounds. Once again, 80 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. There you have it. At this point, since we disconnected the lower strut bolts, it is highly recommended to get an alignment done on the vehicle.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.